I'm just gonna come right out and say it. In 2024, you absolutely should be running a red dot on your handgun, especially if you're a newer shooter. I know that may sound controversial to some of you, but hear me out and let me explain why I think that. Real quick before I get into that, I would appreciate if you're here watching the video, just leaving a like down below on the video and consider subscribing to the channel for future videos as well. You can also consider leaving a comment down below in the comment section. Let me know what you guys think of the content so far. All of those things do help me out and help the channel grow, help the videos reach more people, and allow me to continue to bring more and more videos to you guys. So with that out the way, let's get right into it. So with where we are in gun culture, I guess you'd say today, it's very common for you to see red dots on handguns, similar to something like this right here. This is my Springfield Echelon, and I have the Holosun 507 Comp red dot on here. A very big fan of this dot personally. I really do like it, but it's not uncommon for you to see a setup with something similar to this. However, historically, most people have kind of drilled in that iron sights, something like this on this dagger, just some basic iron sights, are kind of the more natural way to aim a handgun. This is the first way that you should learn how to shoot a handgun, and it's just overall more friendly to beginners. And honestly, I'm gonna have to kind of disagree with that. As someone who also started shooting handguns with iron sights and then later on started shooting with red dot sights, I'm gonna kind of have to err on the side of, I think everyone should really just start shooting with red dots because it would honestly help you as a shooter. But how would that help you as a shooter? I'm glad you asked. Let me try and explain. So with iron sights, how you would use this to aim is you have your front sight and then you have your rear sight. The rear sight typically has two little notches right there, and then the front sight is just one little notch. I'm just trying to speak as plainly as possible. And how you would aim it is you would take that front sight and try to line it up in between the rear sights to get it perfectly centered. It's hard for me to do that while looking at the camera, but I think you kind of get the gist. And once you have that lined up, that is ideally your point of impact and where your bullet is going. So it's two pieces of hardware that make up iron sights. You align them, and then that is how you acquire your target. With a red dot, obviously this is the only thing that you are using to aim, and it is literally just a dot that you align on your target, and wherever that dot is where your bullet is going. Now I'll start with the obvious take out of the gate. I think most people would agree that it's much easier to have to align one thing as opposed to two things when you have a front post and a rear post with iron sights in order to properly use or aim your handgun. And trust me, I understand that may sound blasphemous to some people because iron sights is the natural way, it's the proper way, it's the fundamental. You should learn that before you learn anything. I get that. I've heard all of that. People have told me that. I understand that, but why? In my thinking, for someone who is newer to shooting, who's trying to learn, who's trying to develop better shooting habits, it would make sense to make it easier to aim rather than harder. If they want to try and learn iron sights later on, fine, but why does it have to be that way? I just personally think the barrier to entry should not necessarily have to be as high as it is in some cases, because I've taken people to the range who are newer shooters, and I've done that. You know, I've had them use like a basic Glock with iron sights, taught them how to line it up, and you know, after a while they would eventually get it. And then I handed them a different gun that had a red dot on it, gave them kind of a similar spiel, and they use it, and they're like, oh wow, this is way easier. I like this. And it's like, well, of course you do. It's easier. It's a lot more simpler, and it's a lot easier on the eyes to have to do that. So why wouldn't you like it more? Anyways, that's just my opinion though. You can agree or disagree. Let me know in the comments what you think about that. But the second reason is really the one that I want to focus on, and why I think a red dot is better for newer shooters as opposed to iron sights. And that reason is it will expose your shooting flaws a lot more clearly than it would if you were using iron sights. Let me try and explain as quickly as I can what I mean by that. When you're shooting with iron sights and you're aligning your sights and everything like that, typically there's not really a lot of movement, you know, with the posts. Obviously they're fixed posts and you have it in your hand. There's not really a lot of movement for you to kind of see what's going on as you're holding the gun, as you're breathing, as you're pulling the trigger, things like that. Not really a whole lot going on. It just looks like two fixed posts, and then you shoot and you might miss or you might hit, right? Now, if you've shot with the red dot before, usually the first thing people will notice or struggle with, honestly, is that they have trouble finding the dot, or the dot seems to be moving a little bit, right? And I'll try to illustrate that a little bit here. So you see the dot there, right? And now, normally if somebody's holding the gun, they're gonna be breathing or their hand might be shaking just a little bit. And that dot might, you know, kind of move or sway a little bit like that. And they may have trouble keeping it still. And they think it's a problem with the dot, right? Like, well, this dot won't stay still with this thing. This is why I don't like red dots, because the dot keeps moving. And what that's actually exposing is it's not the dot moving, it's you moving. Since you only have one fine point of contact to reference as your aiming point, it much more clearly exposes your errors in your grip, in your steadiness and things like that. And it shows you in real time how you are messing up in aiming your gun. So you don't really see that as clearly with iron sights because you can't really visually detect that same movement as easily. Of course, if you're focusing really hard, you can probably notice that you're not keeping it perfectly steady. But when you actually have that dot kind of moving around on you and you're having to struggle to find it, that kind of paints that picture like, oh, I see, I need to adjust my grip, or I need to, you know, fix my hand placement, or I need to, you know, squeeze the trigger lighter when I go and, you know, try and take a shot. Because I notice if I pull the trigger too hard, my dot moves, and I don't want my dot to move because that means my point of impact moves. So once someone sees that and understands that, that kind of clicks something in your brain like, oh, grip is important. You know, my trigger pull is important. My breathing is important. My stance is important. These things help me stabilize my dot, which is me stabilizing my gun, which leads to me becoming a better shooter. And I promise you, every time I give someone a gun with a red dot to shoot for the first time, it's like, they're like, oh, I get it. All this stuff you're telling me, you know, pull the trigger slowly, make sure you're gripping it tight. That stuff really does make a difference. And of course, you know, if you shoot with iron sights and practice enough, you know, those things you will eventually learn as well. But I just personally feel, based on experience, that you learn those things a lot quicker and a lot easier shooting with a red dot as opposed to shooting with iron sights. Because, and honestly, once you learn that with your red dot, that will translate over to your iron sights, because you'll still know that those fundamental things are important. Your aiming, you know, optic system is just slightly different. You're just having to align these posts instead of just focusing on the dot, right? That's just something that I've noticed, you know, when shooting with, you know, newer shooters and shooting with experienced shooters too. That really does make a difference in my experience. And again, that is just what I have experienced. You know, you guys may feel I'm dead wrong. You guys may feel something totally differently, and that's totally fine if you do. I'm just trying to share a different perspective on something that you maybe haven't considered yet. But that's honestly it for this video. I appreciate you guys watching up to this point. I would like to know what you guys' opinion on this is. Do you think it's better for a newer shooter to use a red dot Or do you think it's important to learn iron sights first before you go into shooting a red dot? You can let me know what you think about that in the comments. I am kind of interested to see where you guys kind of fall on this, so please let me know that. Once again, thank you for watching. Definitely consider leaving a like on the video and subscribing to the channel. Got more videos on the way, and hope you guys stay tuned for the next one. But I'm gonna get out of here. Be safe, be smart, be blessed, and I'll see y'all in the next one.